In the week since we left Russia, Moscow, where we are now, in February, after interviewing Vladimir Putin, we've watched from the United States as the Biden administration has driven the U.S. ever closer to a nuclear conflict with Russia, the country that possesses the world's largest nuclear arsenal. It has accelerated ever since.
That was Tucker Carlson from Moscow. Just earlier today, he released that because he's going to be conducting about an hour and a half long interview with Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister. And he's going to ask him a whole host of questions related to the current conflict, where it's going, what the Trump administration may do, etc. But that opening comment that he gave right there was something that we felt like we should talk a little bit about today. And we've been discussing it here of late. And Tucker is absolutely right. It's not hyperbole to suggest that since the election, the Biden administration is moving us closer and closer to the possibility of escalating into a general war with Russia. And of course, this one of the primary things is not just the continued support for Ukraine, not just continued the claim that they're going to be brought into NATO, but the specific military allowing U.S. Weapons that were in part operated by the United States troops to fire long-range weapons into Russia. Russia has already responded in one case, and we're waiting to see if anything else happens so far. After the second round of long-range missiles where the US ATACMS was launched into Russia, Russia said that they were going to respond, but thus far there hasn't been any. One can imagine that at least on the Trump team, there apparently is some back channel discussions going on. There's lots of that running around the news. I don't have any insider information on that from the Trump team. The people that I know don't have any knowledge about it. So I can't speak to that, but it does appear through the actions that maybe there is some discussions going on. There is some truth to those reports. And that would be a really good thing, because anything that can keep this from escalating further is only a good thing for the United States and the world, and even ironically for Ukraine as well. But I want to look at a couple of other specific things that Tucker has put out in this short, I think is about a 3.5 minute clip that was kind of like an advance for, hey, this interview is coming up with Sergei Lavrov. And by the way, whenever that does come out, we'll parse it down like we did with his video when he was talking to Vladimir Putin earlier this year in February. And hopefully that will have some nuggets, and hopefully the Trump team will be paying a lot of attention to that as well. And there can be some clues to how we can get this thing de-escalated. But first of all, I wanted to see what Tucker had said in terms of the absence or presence of diplomacy overall.
We felt there must be someone behind the scenes in Washington working to make sure that this conflict doesn't become a nuclear holocaust. But we found out that no, in fact, there is nobody. Tony Blinken, the current Secretary of State, cut off all contact between the U.S. and Russian governments. There is no back channel. There is no conversation. There hasn't been for more than 2 years.
Now, surely Tucker Carlson is exaggerating there. Surely there actually are conversations going on. They actually are. Wait a minute. What was that? I'm sorry. We have this from Tony Blinken apparently corroborating what Tucker just said.
With regard to Minister Lavrov, no, we didn't speak directly, but I was in the room when he made his intervention on behalf of Russia. He was in the room when I made my intervention on behalf of the United States. So I think it's safe to say that we heard each other. I didn't hear anything new, unfortunately.
That was from October, when the Secretary of State, the chief diplomat of the United States of America, said that during the September UN General Assembly speeches, when he spoke for the United States, and the Foreign Minister Lavrov spoke for the Russian side in New York, that he's not talking to him, which completely backs up what Tucker is just saying there. So according to his sources and according to the Secretary of State himself, there's not a lot of conversation going on. In fact, there's no conversation going on. We know that Biden has himself not spoken to Vladimir Putin, I think, since June of 2021. I don't think he's talked to him since the war broke out. There might have been one, but it hasn't been in a while for sure. But the bottom line is that there's no diplomacy going on. We don't seem to ever want to talk to anybody that we don't like. And somehow that is characterized in America today. And this is, again, kind of a uniparty issue. This is both Republican and Democrat. It has been that we don't talk to anybody that we don't like. Not merely that we don't negotiate with terrorists. It's that we don't even talk to people we don't like. Even China, the current administration, hardly ever talks to them. You may recall in the opening months of the Biden administration, we had, I think it was in Alaska, a meeting with senior Chinese diplomats, and we sent Blinken and some other, and we basically just humiliated them on the public stage, just excoriated them, just trashed them from day one. And then there weren't any conversation at all after the predictable pushback that the Chinese side had on the aftermath. And I think that there's only been a handful of meetings with Blinken, with China, what we claim is our biggest adversary and our biggest geostrategic partner that we work with, in kind of an adversarial relationship. And yet we don't even talk to them, hardly ever at the highest levels that we need to. And as I keep saying over and over, how can you get any kind of a negotiation? How can you get any kind of an end to settlement of a conflict, even on your own terms, even on something that's beneficial to you, if you're not talking to anyone? I mean, this should be self-evident, and yet it's lost on our current leadership. And many in the Republican side and the Democrat side alike both say, yes, we shouldn't talk to them. More on that in a minute. But this also extends even to, so Tucker Carlson, by the way, as I mentioned, he talked to Vladimir Putin famously in February. And by the way, that show on his X account has been viewed by 215 million people since then. What does that tell you? That tells you that people around the world want you to talk to people. They want to know what the other side thinks. You don't have to agree with them. You don't even have to like them. You can hate them if you want to, but you have to talk to them. Otherwise, nobody's going to know how this thing ends. And what we've seen so far is just this cascading comments coming from so many. I saw something by the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte earlier today, where he continues to mischaracterize what the Russian side is doing, what their objectives are, et cetera, making it seem one way when it's really a different way. And if you have a misconception on what they're actually trying to accomplish or what they're doing or why, then you're also going to misapply any kind of strategy, any kind of way to resolve it. It's a big deal. It really does matter. And Tucker went on in that same clip right there to talk about that who else he's not been allowed to talk to. Even if he wants to, somehow he was not allowed to talk to Volodymyr Zelensky.
We've also tried for over a year to get an interview with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. We've attacked that from a bunch of different angles. We've spoken to a lot of different people around him, had dinner with them. We've been in talks continuously, and those efforts have been thwarted by the U.S. government. The American embassy in Kiev, which our tax dollars pay for, told the Zelensky government, no, you may not do the interview. You can talk to CNN, you can't talk to us. So we've been unable to speak to him.
Now, why do you suppose that would be? Even when Zelensky did talk to Sky News a few days ago, and we've shown a number of clips out of that interview, it's relatively friendly and just kind of, dances around the edge of some of the difficult questions, whereas Tucker Carlson almost certainly is going to ask hard questions. He didn't ask too many hard questions of Putin, though he did ask a handful back then. But one can imagine that, especially now that he's gotten a lot more comfortable with this, he's going to be asking some hard questions of Sergei Lavrov, or at least going to be asking questions that are hard for us to hear. And I think that's the issue there. Even back in February, where Tucker was talking, no one had been talking in the Western side to Vladimir Putin. We didn't have any idea what he thought about things. A lot of people can say, well, he was just giving disinformation. He was just saying things that, he wants people to hear. Fair enough. There's some of that. I mean, who doesn't give that when they speak? Certainly every person in the White House does that exact same thing on a daily basis. Zelensky does it every time he speaks. So we can assume that the Russians doing the same thing. But here's the thing. If you don't even hear what they say, you don't even have a chance to read between the lines. And when you hear, like the Secretary General, NATO Secretary General, mischaracterizing what it is, then you think that Putin must mean a different thing. And if you don't even hear their side, then we're going to be applying wrong policies. And listen, this goes even further than that, and even more than Tucker was talking about, at least on his video today. And that is in diplomacy general. Now, he mentioned that there was no conversation going on. You heard it straight from the secretary's mouth. I have not talked to Lavrov. President Biden has not talked to his counterpart at all. And when the Olaf, the leader of Germany, when he talked to Putin, made a phone call the other day, he was blasted in the Western media. He was blasted by Zelensky. Opens up a Pandora's box. Don't talk to Putin. Don't talk to anybody on the other side. We keep hearing that over and over. You had Viktor Orban earlier this year, went to Moscow to talk to him. He was ravaged in the Western press. How dare you talk to Putin? Because he wants the war to end. He understands that if you don't have any diplomacy, then the only thing that's left is force. And as I have shown painstakingly for the last year, ever since this channel has been in existence, there is no military path for Ukraine's success. There is only a military path for Ukrainian death. The longer we go on and the longer we continue with this fiction that there is some kind of a military path to success in any category for the Ukraine side, the more we condemn their people to death, either as a state and certainly individuals who are continuing to try to manufacture this or living up to the fiction that we're creating. All it's doing is getting the people we claim to be on our side killed and moving them closer and closer to a bleak future, if there's to be one at all. And that leads me to this next clip. This is from, I believe, earlier today from the Secretary of State, or maybe it's the Secretary of Defense. Let me ask you, watch this for what Biden or the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is saying he's going to do for the remainder of these, I think it's 48 days until the changeover. They're going to do everything they can to get every dollar, several, $6 or $8 billion out the door to Ukraine before we leave. Now, when you watch this, tell me, does this sound like the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense?
A big part of our focus here at NATO, we're focused in very practical, concrete ways, really on three things: making sure that it has the money, the resources it needs to sustain its economy and to sustain its defense. We've now managed, on the basis of the frozen sovereign assets, the Russian assets that are frozen, to get $50 billion to Ukraine that will be going out the door in the coming weeks, both from the United States and Europe, and that will carry Ukraine for some time into next year. Second, munitions and everything that goes with that, whether it's air defenses, whether it's missiles, whether it's armored vehicles, again, to make sure for many months ahead that Ukraine will have what it needs. The United States is pushing out the door everything that we can. And then finally, mobilization. This is critical because even with the money, even with the munitions, there have to be people on the front lines to deal with the Russian aggression. For every person, every soldier that Ukraine mobilizes, we're committed to making sure that they have the training and the equipment they need to effectively defend the country.
Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State? Did you hear one word of diplomacy anywhere in that whole thing? Of course not. You heard everything you would expect to hear from the Secretary of War. That's what he was talking about: ammunition, weapons, supplies, money to keep the war going on. And then I think one of the most egregious, and I think history will show the most immoral thing that the United States has done, led by Secretary of State Blinken, is that he talks about the human cost for the Ukraine side and blithely just says, yes, we want to give them the training, the equipment, and everything they need to be successful. There is no amount of training or anything else that can be done at this point to be successful. All you're doing is getting them killed. So when you're trying to pat yourself on the back there about how great you're doing for the Ukrainian soldiers, all you're doing is condemning them to death. We have report after report. We've been telling you on this channel just yesterday, reports of up to 100,000 Ukrainian men have abandoned the fight and deserted. 100,000. It may be a lot more than that. That's what's being publicly reported in the Western press, and they usually undercount that kind of bad news. And we even know, because we've been talking about it in a bunch of the other Western press talks about how even the guys who show up after this so-called training They might fight once and then they abandon their post afterwards, or they just do the minimum necessary because they can't do anything more than the minimum necessary. You cannot grab people off the streets, throw them in a uniform, give them, even if you did give them a month of training, very often they don't get that much. But if all of them got a month of training, you're not going to be able to be a successful army. That's a mass of privates, basically. You can't manufacture sergeants with 5 to 7 years of experience, or captains, company commanders with 7 to 8 years of experience, or battalion commanders, company first sergeants, sergeants majors, etc. Those things take 10, 15, 20 years to create. You cannot do it by just throwing somebody in uniform and throwing some rank on their collar. It doesn't matter. Now, anyone who studied war understands that. It's self-evident. And for these people at this level to sit there and say, we're going to provide that stuff for them and think there's going to be an outcome is immoral, because you're condemning them to death. And that's why this is so doubly egregious. Not only are we basically sacrificing their own lives in a futile effort, we're also putting at risk our own security by continuing down a path that can't succeed. Now, that's at the tactical level. Blinken added to his woes at the strategic level when he's talking about NATO.
Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership, but we're focused on this in a practical way. We set up a dedicated NATO command whose purpose is to help speed Ukraine down that path to membership. And one of the things we focused on here was making sure that that command was fully resourced. And now countries have stepped up to make sure that they have the people in place to make the command operational. That, as a practical matter, along with the reforms that Ukraine continues to engage, is what's going to move it to membership in the alliance. So Ukraine is on a clear trajectory that we've worked to establish and that we want to make sure continues through the end of this year and well into next year. And that way, the Ukrainians will be in a strong position to make the decisions that they need to make about their future. If Russia insists on continuing the aggression, Ukraine will be able to deal with it. If Russia is actually prepared to negotiate in good faith, Ukraine will be able to do it from a stronger position.
Oh, gracious. That's hard to even watch. And let me explain to you why. So toward the tag end of that, he said, this is to strengthen, the NATO membership is just, and all the equipment that we're going to give them is to strengthen their ability to negotiate from a position of strength. Okay. First of all, there's a very, very subtle yet profound shift in the verbal comments that we've been making in the West, and certainly by Blinken in particular. We used to always talk about victory. This is, Zelensky's victory plan, and that we were going to help them drive Russia off the field and all this kind of nonsense. Now, all of a sudden, with no explanation, actually, it's about negotiation. So that's what we're going to do now. So this is about negotiation, and this is the part to where it is absolutely malfeasance to the highest degree, and either gross incompetence, or I don't know what's worse than gross incompetence in a Secretary of State. You're claiming that you want to put Ukraine on an irreversible path to NATO membership so that they can negotiate an end to the fighting with Russia. Russia went to war, according to the previous NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, because of NATO in Ukraine. Putin told Biden in June 2021, and apparently in December and January of 2021, and then January 2022, he told NATO, if you continue on to put NATO into Ukraine and allow them to join, there will be war. Stoltenberg said that straight up, directly, overtly. And he said, of course, we didn't sign that in a flip of the wrist. So point blank, that's what started the war in the first place. The NATO going into right up to Russian territory. And now then you have, I don't know if it's audacity, temerity, stupidity, I don't know which. It's hard to find the right verb, adverb. All I know, the adjective, all I know for sure is how stupid it is. Because what you're telling Russia, Mr. Diplomat, there is no reason for you to talk to anyone. Just keep fighting. Because the only way we're leaving Russia to have an end to the war is to have a decision on the battlefield to conquer the territory that they feel they need to have a security zone on their western flank. That's all he's leaving. The chief diplomat of the United States, the one that leads the entire Western alliance, is telling the opposition through the media, because obviously he's not talking to them personally, that the only way for you to get your security that you say you need is by fighting for it. There's not even the option to find a negotiated settlement, because that at the bare minimum is going to be some territorial concessions and no NATO declaration and something with some kind of guarantees for the Russian side. Now, you may think, what do you mean guarantees for the Russian side? Well, listen, if we're just talking about fantasies, then don't talk about anything on the Russian side. Don't give them any reason to do anything. Just say, we want this outcome, and that's how it's going to be. That's how diplomacy is done right now at the international level in the West, led by the United States of America. Fantasy. This is the outcome we wish to have. So it's the one we're going to act on. And you can say crazy stuff all kinds of all over the time, but if you then take action based on the fantasy, you're continuing to harm yourself. Ergo, Tucker's comment at the very beginning of the show that we're moving closer and closer to nuclear war. Now, so far, we haven't crossed the last threshold after the initial couple of rounds of long-range missiles. Apparently, according to some reports I saw in the news this morning, some of the conversations between the Trump team and the Putin team are reaping some rewards. It's saying, hey, just don't fire any more of these long-range weapons until I get in there and then I get in control. Don't do any more. Don't stir that up any possible. I think that's the only reason we haven't seen a next round from the Russian side, which is what they said they were going to do. But I think there is evidence that that conversation is going place. Thank goodness. And in fact, that's the one thing we have to really hope, that the new team that's coming in is willing to. And listen, I mean, Trump took a lot of heat in his first term because he was willing to talk to all these so-called dictators and whatever. And he was mocked ruthlessly in the media for cozying up to dictators, as the phrase kept getting used. Of course, that's just because people want it the old way. They want it to where nobody gets talked to at all. And we project this image of strength and whatever, which is stupid because it's not strength. It's absurdity. Everybody in the world recognizes the ridiculousness of the no talk to anybody clauses. And they understand you can't get anything done if you're not talking. Now, this has been going on for a while, too. And the incoming Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is a personal example of this. Now, back in 2017, she was a member of the Democratic Party and a serving member of Congress. And she had the temerity to say, look, this whole system that's blowing up in Syria and in the Middle East right now, if we're ever going to get into it, we're going to have to talk to somebody we don't like, i.e. Bashar al-Assad. Here's what Tulsi said in, I believe it was February 2017, when she was asked on CNN, why did you go?
So you were in Syria for 4 days. Did you meet with President Bashar al-Assad?
I did. My reason for going to visit Syria was really because of the suffering of the Syrian people that has been weighing heavily on my heart. I wanted to see if there was, in some small way, a way that I could express the love and the aloha and the care that the American people have for the people of Syria, and to see firsthand what was happening there, to see that situation there.
What did Assad have to say?
Initially, I hadn't planned on meeting him. When the opportunity arose to meet with him, I did so because I felt it's important that if we profess to truly care about the Syrian people, about their suffering, then we've got to be able to meet with anyone that we need to if there is a possibility that we could achieve peace. And that's exactly what we talked about.
How dare she? How dare she want to achieve peace and be willing to do something about it? Because you may know at that time, the Obama administration had been doing stuff for a lot of years to try to support a number of different jihadi groups and other so-called rebel groups inside Syria to try and overthrow the Assad regime. They had fallen flat. You may also recall that some of the groups that the Pentagon funded and supported, and some of the groups that the CIA funded and supported, ended up fighting each other. as well as against the Syrian regime, ineffectively, as it turned out. And it was because of all of that inaction that the Russians then came in on the side of Bashar al-Assad, and their air power especially helped turn the tide in there and basically stop the advance of the Russian side. Tulsi said, hey, let's just get the war over with. Let's figure out what we can do. And is there any room for negotiation and discussions? And so that's why she went there originally, just to see, as you heard her say there, and then an opportunity came to talk to Assad, and she took it. And of course, she was vilified in the press afterwards for having the audacity to talk to Assad. And when one time specifically asked, is Assad an enemy of America? She says, no, we're not at war with Syria. So just self-evidently, no, he's not an enemy of the United States. We don't like him. We don't like his policies. We don't like some of the things he's doing that led to the Civil War, because he was definitely had dirty hands and bloody hands on that without question. She didn't question any of those things. She just said, that's the reality here. We're not at war against Bashar al-Assad. Ergo, he is not, technically speaking, rationally speaking, he's not our enemy. So you can hate him, but he's not your enemy. So let's talk to him and try to find if there's any way that we can help facilitate an end so that the suffering of the Syrian people comes to an end. If anyone actually cared about people in the Middle East or in Ukraine, then they would be having a lot different policies. This, in my view, exposes the horrible nature of the truth that many don't care about the people in these target areas. They only care about so-called harming XYZ, whatever other side is, whether it's Syria, Iran, or Russia, or North Korea, whatever, China. If we can harm them, then we could care less about the body count of the other people that we claim to want to support. Tulsi put her shoe leather on the line there. And in this other report here, I want to see from around the same time, they were asking her a little bit more about why she was doing what she did.
She thinks the U.S. should focus on eliminating ISIS and al-Qaeda, not President Assad.
We've got to end these destructive regime change war policies and take a stand for peace.
A Democrat, she criticized the Obama administration's strategy of arming rebel groups.
Most people are not aware of the fact that really since 2011, our government has quietly been providing weapons, money, intelligence, and other types of support, both directly and indirectly, to armed militant groups who are working with and allied with terrorist groups like al-Qaeda in this effort to overthrow the Syrian government.
That's where things turned bad for Tulsi Gabbard in the Democratic Party. She took on the Obama administration and said, what we're doing is not working. It is failing, and it is causing disaster for the people of Syria. So we need a different policy. She called it out for what it was. And that's when really the party started turning against her. And then when she ran for president in so the 2020 primary process for the Democrats, Hillary Clinton was just horribly against her. And you know, all the things that went down from there. So that was where basically the Democratic Party lost somebody that could have been a stalwart for them. Can you imagine if Joe Biden had selected her as his running mate instead of Kamala Harris in that election? Someone who had some genuine skills and could have produced positive outcomes for the United States by talking to whatever it took, by saying, like she did in that last clip there, things about ISIS, we're going after them. If there's an actual enemy of America, yes, go after them. She is still a serving member of the U.S. Army Reserves as a lieutenant colonel. So she is still willing to go into combat zones if that's what's required. And so someone who has been deployed to combat zones on at least 2 occasions should get a little bit more credibility for wanting to defend the United States and work. But unfortunately, that still is in the same arc that we don't have now. That we do have now, where you don't want to talk to anybody that you don't like. And hopefully that's changed. The fact that President-elect Trump chose Tulsi Gabbard to be the important position of the Director of National Intelligence, maybe that's going to indicate that he's willing to change that path again and to go back to something and maybe even expand it. The fact that he's talking about having negotiations at the beginning of his term with the Russia-Ukraine war. So hopefully what Tucker Carlson's going to discover here when he talks to Lavrov and publishes that interview. And again, you can count on us. We will parse that thing for you and show you the no kidding what it really means. Hopefully the Trump team will be watching and will take advantage of any openings that are presented there so that we can avoid any escalation, avoid us ever even thinking about having to fight a nuclear war with Russia. And for the people of Ukraine who I do care about, and you just saw it, that the Tulsi Gabbard does care about that the people. So we want to see the Ukrainian people stop suffering by ending this war. There's a lot of stuff lost. Hundreds of thousands have been killed and wounded already. It's irreplaceable. They've lost basically 2 generations of people already, which is going to significantly damage and inhibit their ability to even recover from this. It's going to be a long, painful, expensive process already. But what we need to do is end that suffering so that we can begin the healing process. And that's just where we are. That's what needs to happen. Let's just hope that this current administration doesn't authorize any more long-range missile strikes, and that we have to get into a situation to where we're worried about kinetic response. Diplomacy, folks, that is the way. Genuine diplomacy, talking to anyone, people you like, people you don't like, looking out for the interests of the United States and the people we claim to want to support. That's where we need to go. Thank you very much for this. I appreciate this. This is a quick one that we did this morning because we saw this coming out from Tucker Carlson. And here in a couple of hours at 2 o'clock this afternoon, Colonel Doug McGregor is going to be talking about the Ukraine and NATO, Biden's kind of classic bait and switch. And we're going to see kind of another aspect of this whole lack of diplomacy issue where we say one thing, but we're doing something very different. Doug's going to talk to us about that. See you this afternoon at 2 p.m. on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.